Hey there, good afternoon everybody. Welcome here to Prog Monster. My name is Murph. I am the host of this show. This is a show dedicated to progressive rock and other forms of rock music. So we're here on Wednesday night to do one of my Wednesday night favorite episodes. So normally for those of you who maybe are new to the channel and don't really follow what I'm doing, every Wednesday night I pick some kind of a topic and I make either a list of my favorite 5 this or my favorite 25 that or whatever, right? And then on occasion, one such as this, I will do an album ranking of a specific group. I've done, without going and checking, I think I've done 7 or maybe I've done 8 now, I don't know. The most recent one, I believe, was my Yes discography. I took the albums of Yes and I ranked them according to how I like them. And that's what I'm going to do today. Today we're going to rank the studio albums of this band, Genesis. So, for me, Genesis is a much-loved band. Their history with me is kind of different. It's not different in the sense that I didn't have this same type of thing with other bands. I did. And for my time period, for most of you know that I got into certain bands and I listened to them and became involved with them and they became favorite bands. And then there's a second group of bands that I listened to and I really liked a lot, but I got out of them for a while only to come back. And then there's bands like Genesis here, who I liked stuff by them a lot, but I just didn't pursue them. For some reason, I didn't pursue anything beyond those couple of albums. In the case of Genesis, it's 2 albums. Trick of the Tail and Wind of the Wuthering were the 2 that I got into initially. And then for the next 20 years, I really didn't listen to anything else by them except for the stuff that was on the radio or the occasional song my friend would play or whatever, right? But I knew that they existed and I knew I liked them because I had gotten into Peter Gabriel in a big way and liked his stuff a lot. It just seemed natural to go back and listen to his other stuff, their other stuff with him on it as well. So I had, in 1988, I bought a slew of albums at a store, spent about $300 or something, and most of them just sat on the shelf for years, and the Genesis albums were part of that sit on the shelf for years thing. Then in the beginning of 2001, when my daughter was born and I was working a couple of jobs, try to keep everything floating, I had a car and I had a CD player and I just brought those CDs and started listening to them, and that's where Genesis really took off for me and became one of my favorite bands. In my top 3, they were my 3rd favorite band. And so today we are going to do their discography. I don't know why it's a little bit moist here for some reason. Anyways, I'm just going to move my heater over a little. So we're going to do them according to how I always do these things, which is I'm going to rank them from my least favorite of their albums to my most favorite of the albums. Now, I do have their entire Genesis discography for the studio albums, which is what I'm ranking today, just the studio albums. I do have several of their live things as well, but generally speaking, I do these rankings. I just do the studio albums. I am missing one, the very last one, Calling All Stations. It's not that I don't want it. I'd like to have it, but either I never see it anywhere, or when I do see it, they're asking too much, and I'm not going there. So it's an album that I like. It's not an album that I like because I don't really know it. I haven't actually listened to it, but what I'm going to say about it is that it's going to come in at number 15 to start, only because I haven't listened to it. So in actual fact, it's being ranked without being heard, and so it doesn't really mean anything to the ranking because it's not really involved. So I will say that I will give it a chance if I get it, and maybe it'll go up in the ranking. So we're going to do this according to the way I always do this, which is, of course, like from my least favorite to my most favorite. And I'm going to put it in 2 different stacks here, so that we're going to do the first stack, which is the least favorite albums. So for me, Genesis has a lot of they have it there isn't a single album that they have that there isn't at least one song on the album that I like. That just is a gimme. There isn't a lot of bands like that though. Even Rush. There's one album by Rush that I can't listen to it. There's actually a couple I don't really like, but one I won't listen to. I don't even know if I like anything on it. But I don't really have that with Genesis. So we're going to start with what I consider to be my least favorite of their albums. But there are a few tracks on this album that I do like. So that is, of course, We Can't Dance. This is a much maligned album too by the Prog network here on the YouTube. Most people consider this their worst album. I'm not going to argue with it. It's my worst for today because I'm not calling all stations. It has at least one track on it that I like quite a bit, and that Jesus, He Knows Me. I don't know what it is about this track, but I just really like it. And so based on that, I can't call this a crap album. There is a lot of stuff on here that does absolutely nothing for me, though. I Can't Dance. No. And most of the rest of stuff is just pretty much unmemorable stuff. So that's why this album is going to come in at number 14. It's just because it just isn't enough on here to warrant it being any higher than what it is. Genesis, We Can't Dance. Okay. The next album up is the Invisible Touch album. So this album, I believe, for some reason the back part is upside down from the front part. That's kind of weird. Anyways, this album was released in 1986. I do like Invisible Touch. I don't mind that song. But Tonight, it's okay. The rest of the stuff, to me, is just completely unmemorable. Or I don't like it, one or the other. So, Invisible Touch. I think it skims ahead of We Can't Dance, just because I think on the whole it's a little bit better than that album. So it's going to, and because I like the song Invisible Touch probably more than anything on that other album too. So I would say this album and the last one really barely pass, if they pass at all. Today I'm going to give them a pass, but normally I don't think of them as passing albums. So that's number 13. Number 12 is so sorry, I was just deciding whether this album that comes after it should come after it. So this album, I know this is much maligned as well for the album cover. People hate this album cover. I'm not really sure what the point is to the album cover, but at the same time, I don't actually mind the brightness of the album. Yellow is a color I like a lot. So, and the little put in the little kids' toy things, I don't really mind that too much either. The song Mama is a good song. I like that one. Home by the Sea. Illegal Alien, I do like that track quite a bit. But the rest of the album is pretty much, again, forgettable and not a great. The best thing about this album is I always remember it because this album cover is very bright. And so this album actually came out in, let me see here, 1983. It's their self-titled album, but it's not really, I don't know why they would do a self-titled album after so many years of having so many other albums, but they did. And so it's not a terrible album. It would pass no matter what, because it's got at least 2 or 3 songs on here, and that's why it's going to come in number 12 over the other 2 albums, just because there's more stuff on it that I like. Number 11, this is a recent album to my collection. I've listened to it a half dozen times already. Genesis, from Genesis to Revelations, it's going to come in here at number 11. And I think basically the reason it's here at number 11 is because I like it better than the first 3 already, but I haven't listened to it enough to really rank it much higher. It doesn't really have that Genesis sound to it as much as the other albums too. It's kind of pre-Genesis sound, but there is some good stuff on here. I do like Gabriel's vocals, of course, and You know, I'm not as familiar with the tracks as I probably would be given another year of listening to this. But there is some stuff on here that I do like. It's got a nice sound to it too, and I do not mind the cover. I think it's the only one with all of the members on the cover. Yeah, I can't see any others. So comes here at number 11. So those are the first 4 albums, and this one, the next album, is probably the last of the albums that I really don't care for much. And this might come as a shock to people. Is this album is next, Duke. Duke comes here at number 10. The reason that Duke comes at number 10 is that I've never warmed up to this album. I'm not really sure what it is. And ironically, the 2 songs I have warmed up are the 2 radio ones, the Misunderstanding and Turn It On Again. Turn It On Again, I love that song. It's one of my favorites. It's the reason why this album ranks just higher than the other ones. And the reason it ranks higher is because of that one song. But for the most part, the prog stuff on here, which people tell me is really good, I just can't warm to it. I'm not sure why it was. I do like, where is it? I can't see it. Oh, Behind the Lines, which is the opening track. Sorry. I do like that song too. It's the one song that that the prog people say is good that I like. Sorry, there's a little bit of mist going on in here today. Yeah, so a good, I think this album, given time, might warm for me a little bit more, but I've tried and tried and tried many times since I got it like 3 years ago to really get into it, and every time I'm always disappointed. So can't say much more about it. So it passes, but barely passes, so it's coming here at number 10. So the first 5 albums, for those of you keeping track, have barely passed. So you're saying, does this guy really like Genesis or not? You know, yeah. Now it starts to change. So now you start to getting into the stuff that I really like. So the last album that came out in that 1980s era of Genesis, that you've seen 5 of them already, is this one, Abacab. I do not really like the cover as much, but the song Abacab is better to me, is better than any of the stuff that I've talked about on any of the previous 5 albums. This is the number 9 album. No Reply at All is another song I like quite a bit that's on this album. The rest of the stuff is okay. There isn't really anything bad on here that I don't like, but the song Abacab I absolutely love. It's one of my favorite Genesis songs, and it definitely gets this album higher than all the other albums so far. So number 9, Abacab from Genesis. Now we get into the serious stuff. Okay, so the next album up, to me this was a bit of a debate. On one hand, I really like several tracks on the album, and it's a much more noted album than the other one. But on the other hand, I've listened to this one album a lot, and today I'm going to put this album below it. So this will be my number 8. I know I'm going to take a hit for this. I get it. I understand why people love this album. I can see why it's, for many people, their favorite Genesis album. I get that. For me, it isn't. And it's not because of that it's a bad album. I think this is a great album. This is where the great albums begin for me. It doesn't make a masterpiece for several reasons. It's just too long. And most of you know I don't really like albums that are 40, 45 minutes long. This is a double album, so of course it's much longer than anything else they did. It also doesn't really fit into the progression of their music. If you start from their first real album and go right up to when they started to change and become different And Then You Were Three, they all kind of get progressively a little bit more, like it progresses along in a nice kind of a straight curve line, where this one kind of is an outlier. It doesn't really fit into that very well. Yes, it has some absolute killer classics on here. The Lamb Lies Down on Broadway, which is the title track of the album, which is so good. In the Cage, another great tune. Carpet Crawlers, yes, absolutely. These are absolute killer tracks. But there's just as much stuff on here that I don't really recall as much. There is one, Here Comes the Supernatural, and I don't even know how to say this word, anthelistist. I can't even think, I don't even know what that word is. I'm sorry. And I like The Light Dies Down on Broadway as well. So there are some really good tracks on this album. And some of the other stuff, I'm not going to say that it's filler. There are some filler songs on here for sure. I'm sure of it. If this was a single album and they put all the best tracks on it, maybe I would be thinking different. But it sounds different than the other Genesis albums too. So, but there are some songs on here. This is a longer, more involved, more, it's a concept album and everything. So it requires a lot more listening to it. And I just haven't listened to it as much as I probably should. And maybe it'll grow on me in time. But it's still a great album. Still has all of the elements of Genesis that I like. So it's going to come here at number 8. Number 7. I almost put this as number 8. I think The Lamb Lies Down on Broadway is a much better constructed, more representative of their great work than this album. But this album had more of an impact on me because I've had it longer and listened to it longer too. And then there were 3. Down and Out, I like that. Undertow's a good song. Deep in the Motherlode is one of my favorite Genesis tracks, and it's probably my favorite on this album. I do like that song a lot. Many Too Many, it's okay. Scenes from a Night's Dream, another one of my favorite songs to sing. Say It's All Right, Joe. I know there's a little bit of a hit taken against that song, but I like it. I like that song a lot. It's grown on me. And then, of course, you get Follow You, Follow Me, which is the big hit on the album. I like it. I think it's a great Genesis song. I think Phil Collins' voice is great on it. I love that little guitar part that goes on throughout the song. But many people, of course, can't stand it because they feel that was one of the songs that was the signal of the change of the band. I'm not going to disagree with that either because I think they're probably right. So that's number 7. So the top 6, I'm looking at them all. Top 6 are all masterpieces. They all have masterpiece status with me. That means they're great. I love them. There's not much separating them. The next one is the most recent masterpiece. It comes in at number 6, Trespass. This is kind of the first Genesis album to really have that Genesis sound to it. I love the album cover. It's kind of almost classic sounding, classic looking, and the album is a very classic Genesis sound. Looking for Someone, great tune. White Mountain, I love that strong. Stagnation, another great, wonderful Genesis song. Dusk is good, and The Knife, of course, is legendary. And this album is one of my albums that I reach for a lot from Genesis because it has a unique quality about it. It has that sound, but I'm not tired of listening to it yet. I haven't burned it out yet. And so it's one of the ones I go to quite a bit. And I have had this all, listening to this now for about 25 years fairly regularly. It's not got to that point where it's burned out yet. So it comes here at number 6. Number 5 is the beginning of the classic era for me. Trespass really was that, but Nursery Crime. Great album cover. I love it. I think it's typical British humor. I love it. The album is proliferated with great songs. The Musical Box, one of my favorite Genesis songs. The Return of the Giant Hogweed, which was one of my favorite songs initially by this band. Harold the Barrel, which is kind of a funny, kind of humorous, kind of very Monty Python-ish type song, I think. Harlequin, great tune. And then, of course, The Fountain of Salmacis, which is absolutely killer and maybe one of their best underrated tracks. Genesis Nursery Crime here at number 5. So that album by itself, if that album was in most other bands' discography, it would be number one easy. But Genesis has 4 more that are better than it, I think. So the next one up, this album has been higher at times, but the gray kind of dim, bleak cover and the back part is just as good. And the tracks on it are fantastic. I love this album. 11th Earl of Mar was initially my very favorite song by Genesis. One for the Vine. I really like this tune a lot. That storytelling is great here. Your Own Special Way is okay. It was kind of their first kind of sauntering here into that realm of pop music. What Gorilla? It's okay. All in the Mouse's Night, probably my favorite or second favorite track on the album. I just love this song. Blood on the Rooftops is the other one that I love a lot, and either one of these two is, to me, just fantastic tunes. Unquiet Slumbers for Sleepers, In the Quiet Faith, another good track, or 2 good tracks actually, and Afterglow is a nice ending to the album. This is, of course, minus Peter Gabriel. We got Phil Collins singing vocals here instead, but still just such a great album. And I got the shakes again today, sorry. So there you go, number 4. Number 3. These next 3 are really splitting hairs, I'm telling you. So number 3 is this album, Foxtrot. Yes, it probably has the best Genesis track in Watchers of the Skies. However, it also has the epic Supper's Ready with all of its little intricacies, and I think this is the best song that Tony Banks is on. I think he is just killer on this thing. And then you got the little Horizons outlay classical bit by Steve Hackett that opens this side of the album. Really good, really good. And then you've got 2 of my favorite tracks is that deeper cut tracks like Can Utility and the Coastliners and Timetable. Love both of those. Get 'Em Out by Friday is a quirky little kind of British song too. Just such a good album. No real weakness on this album. Fantastic. The album cover is great. You know, this costume that Peter Gabriel eventually wore on stage, really cool. So Foxtrot, number 3. And Foxtrot has made some significant gains in recent years too, but it's still just being edged out by this album, Selling England by the Pound, which is kind of a quirky cover, very British looking, you know. And it's just proliferated with that British sound. Dancing with the Moonlit Night, killer track, opens the album. One of the best openings for Genesis on any album. I Know What I Like in Your Wardrobe. That's one of those deep cuts that I really like a lot by Genesis. This is a song that I just love. Firth of Fifth. Such a great track. So much good stuff on this particular track. Just absolutely killer. The only track on this album that more fool me, I'm not a big fan of this song. It sounds like the beginning of that Phil Collins era. And although I do like Phil Collins' music a lot, this particular track, not really to my liking. It's the only track on any of these top albums that I really don't care for. The Battle of Epping Forest, epic. There's nothing more to say about it. It's absolutely quirky as hell, very British. Peter Gabriel's storytelling is at its best on this track, just so good. After the Ordeal, really good. And then we get to the Cinema Show, which is up there amongst my very favorite Genesis songs. Maybe my favorite on this album. I just love the keyboard part. I think that Banks is killer on that. And Isle of Plenty to end it isn't a bad track either. So, number 2, Genesis, Selling England by the Pound. And just barely beating it out, and not because this was my favorite Genesis album. It's one of the original 2 Genesis albums that I bought and listened to. I love everything on this album. Absolutely love everything on this album. But it's under assault now from Selling England by the Pound and even Foxtrot. It could end up dropping a little bit. It's just, and it's not because the album has gotten worse over the years. It's just that I've listened to it so much. It's just burned. It's one of the most burned out albums that I owned. Dance on a Volcano was my initial favorite on this album. That and Squonk, those were my two favorite. I don't care for those tracks as much because I've heard them so much. I just don't want to hear them anymore. Entangled, I think, is the best track on this album, and it's grown into that position, and I love it. Madman Moon, another really good track. I know some people don't really like Robbery, Assault, and Battery. I absolutely love that tune. It's one of my favorites to sing. Ripples, of course, was my favorite during my daughter's time period when she was born. I used to love this song so much. Trick of the Tail has grown on me. The only weaker song on the album is Los Endos, which is like What Gorilla. I don't really dislike either of those tunes, but because they're both instrumentals, I'm not as big a fan of them as most people are. So there you have it. Genesis Trick of the Tail comes in at number 1. Still holding on there. Maybe if I did this in a couple years, maybe it's going to drop a few notches. But this was one of my entry-level albums. I got the two, Wind and the Wuthering, and this at the same time. And they were my entry-level albums into this group. And it's funny that neither one of them had Peter Gabriel on vocals, but I still love them both. And I do like Phil Collins quite a bit too. So now we'll just do what I normally do, which is just reiterate the albums in case people couldn't remember what I had said or missed some parts. So we have number 1, Trick of the Tail. Number 2, Selling England by the Pound. Number 3, Foxtrot. Number 4, Wind and the Wuthering. Number 5, Nursery Crime. Number 6, Trespass. Number 7, And Then There Were Three. Number 8, and probably going to get me hit over the head, The Lamb Lies Down on Broadway. Number 9, Genesis self-titled album. Number 10, Duke. Number 11, Genesis from Genesis to Revelation. Is that number 11? Number 12, this is Genesis. That other one was, this one was actually Abacab. I apologize. This is Genesis self-titled. Number 13, Invisible Touch. And number 14, We Can't Dance. And then, of course, number 15 would be Calling All Stations, but it's not really fair to rank that when you really haven't listened to it. Maybe it would end up halfway up the board. Maybe it wouldn't. I don't know. But unless you're going to listen to it, you can't really rank it. So that's my Genesis ranking of their studio albums. I hope you enjoyed this video as much as I enjoyed actually doing it. It really puts Genesis back in my forefront, which is, I think, important. They're a legendary band for a reason. So if you have your rankings, you can put them in the comment section below. Anything you want to comment about that I said, or anything that you want to say about any of the albums, go right ahead. Just remember that this is just my own personal rankings. This is not, absolutely not, the definitive rankings of Genesis, because if you were going to do a definitive ranking and you had a bunch of people deciding what was the best album, I'm sure that Lamb would be right near the top, if not at the top. So please hit the like and subscribe, and please hit the notification bell if you want to be notified of any more of this great content. And take care, and we will see you next Wednesday night with another Wednesday Night Favorites. Take care. Bye.